And there we go with that very dramatic music and entrance. I'm excited because we have got Dr. Christopher Gilbert, Chris Gilbert here live in Amazon. And Chris, you actually are the first philosopher that we have. And I'll call you that, the first philosopher we have here for your book, Noble Edge, Reclaiming an Ethical World, One Choice at a Time. And this is a great book, and definitely necessary. So I look forward to just kind of walking through some of the journey with you on writing the book, the applications, and kind of the long-term meaning. But with that, let's start off and have you introduce yourself. Tell the folks who Dr. Gilbert is and what is going on in your world.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here, Scott, and to have this opportunity. And I appreciate the title, Philosopher. I'm going to call me a practical, because the book, while it's philosophically got some concepts in it, it's actually, as you stated, really about action steps that we can take. And in fact, it's trying to get us out of some of the muck and mire of philosophy that sometimes argues for its own sake rather than come to some conclusion. You know, there's this great axiom that things that begin with words and end with words, they're meaningless. It's the things that begin with words and end with actions that we're really, really looking for, especially in ethics. So, but I appreciate the opportunity and thank you. I don't know how far back you want me to go. I guess what I'll say is I got a bachelor's in geology, so that tells you about my connection to the environment in some way.
I love that we got this book on ethics, and it starts with rocks. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and then I went back and got my MBA when I was tired of freezing various appendages off in minus 120-degree wind chill on the North Slope in Alaska.
Oh my gosh!
Not looking for oil, but looking for gravel, construction material, and got a job as a professor at one of the state colleges here in Washington, Evergreen. And not too many years after that, I wound up being asked to become a chief marketing officer for a small entrepreneurial company called Cravings, and it was the food delivery business. Would have been doing excellently now, I think. But it was.
And I'll just tell people that is a fascinating story and a great application of ethics. But keep going. I don't want to get bogged down into that yet.
Yeah, no, but I mean, really, you start thinking about that story, which is one of the first ones in the book. It really was an interesting lesson in me about ethics. In that case, it was business ethics, because long story short, we lost our company to a huge Fortune 500 food service company that decided that they would stay in our operation for a month and then leave, and wrote us back and said they weren't interested in helping us expand across the US. And then they opened up their own version, almost identical to the business that we had out in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And they decided that they would give it their own. And we lost a company that was thinking about, another company was thinking about buying us out and helping us expand across the US. And I think for us, laying off those 35 employees that had been with us for about 3.5 years, wonderful, very loyal people, was probably one of the hardest things I ever had to do in my life, because by that time I was president of the organization. And I think I didn't at the time think of it as a ethics lesson, which is kind of funny to me now. But later on, a few years later, I realized, there's got to be a better way for organizations, especially to leaders, individuals, to make choices, ethical choices, and that there was something wrong with the process of learning ethics that I needed to think about as I was, again, a professor. So I really started researching this from the perspective of how can I teach business ethics? And that's how I got to the point where I got my PhD in organizational leadership and management in leadership ethics specifically. And that's what really led me to start doing this as a consultant in places around the world. And finally to write in this book about 20 or 25 years worth of the experiences that got me to the point to say, you know, there really is a better way for us to make ethical choices, and an easier way than what we've been presented with in the past. And that's really what the book does. It has that message and hopefully creates that conversation about another way, a better way of thinking about making ethical choices.
And I think it's pretty clear that you're talking about that it does come down to the actions. And I'll tell people that in the book, you have 21 actions.
Yes.
21, that clearly defined. So there it is, the noble edge, and the book is highlighted here in the carousel. So it's easy for people to click on it, take a look, add it to cart, and get a copy of that. The ethics, just as a bit of irony. When I went into my master's program, my MBA, the very first class that I took was ethics of that series. And it's funny because historically we think, oh, well, when you take one class, once you get through it, that you pass the final, you can forget all about it when you move into your next class. The very next class that I took after ethics was marketing.
Oh, wow.
And so
that's a good juxtaposition.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. So hopefully I didn't forget my ethics when I went into the marketing side.
Well, I'll tell you what, all the dealings I've had with you, it's been a pleasure to be with you. And I really enjoyed seeing, for instance, the titles that you've been talking about with different authors, including, I think I saw ethics in marketing or ethical marketing. Because it's so easy to get lost in the conundrum. And I don't know, maybe this will be interesting to folks or not. This is another place that the book covers the area of ethics, and it's how we learn about ethics. And you could ask that question to any individual. Maybe they'll ponder this. How'd you learn your ethics? And they come from various sources, but quite often there's something, like you say, in school, K through 12, or on to university and colleges and bachelors and so forth, where we get an understanding of ethics. But my research in ethics actually showed me what I had suspected in teaching ethics, is that the people who have received formal training or education in ethics versus the people who haven't received any formal training, formalized training of some kind, the people who received the formal training actually make lower level moral choices than the people who have not received the training. And I think that's more an indictment about how we teach, we being professors or consultants or trainers, how we teach ethics than anything else, because quite often it is taught very philosophically and everything's left up in the air and lots of decisions look like they're just fine when you're making them. But it really empowers people not to walk out the door and have an ethical framework they use all the time to make choices, but to walk out the door, whether it's a corporate door, a board door, an education, a schoolroom door, and make choices and then find the ethical framework that makes it rational, logical, and ethical, because some of these frameworks actually argue against one another. And I'm not saying anybody makes a choice and then thinks about, oh, I was a rationalist today, or boy, was I a consequentialist. But we really rationalize in certain ways with all the choices we make. And the education that we were receiving, especially if it's philosophically based, kind of empowers us to be able to find the framework that makes what we're choosing, no matter what it is, an ethical one. And I said, boy, there's got to be a better way to talk about and to train this. And again, that's what the book and my work is about.
It's interesting because when we start looking at this, we think about ethics, we think about right and wrong, we think about legal, what's legal, but they're not all the same.
No, absolutely not. In fact, legality, which is quite often where business leaders will run to, is really the minimum required for making ethical choices. Maybe the way to think about it is that law tells us what we can do, but it's really ethics that tell us what we should do.
Right.
And that's exactly what we should expect in our organizations, even in our families, and the leaders that we've got, is not necessarily what we can do, but what we should be doing. And I think it creates a different standard to really think about it that way. So law is kind of the low bar in thinking about what's ethical. Sometimes it's right on. Sometimes we see laws change completely. So for a time, 40, 50 years ago, segregation was legalized.
Sure.
Whites only drinking fountains, restaurants for whites, and so forth were all part of the law in some states, at least.
Hmm.
And that's just 40 or 50 years ago. And we know those
Sure.
laws have changed. So, did the ethics change? No. The ethics were actually always the same. It was about equity and equality for
Hmm.
everyone. Everybody has the right to achieve their capacity. And if you frame people as different or lower, they can't do that. And so the law, the ethics around us really wound up making us, as we socially developed, begin to change the laws so that these things were no longer applicable. And just to drone on a little bit here, if you think about ethics and morality, because those two get used semantically, we'll use them today a bit semantically. Morals are really the agreements we have about what are right and wrong. And ethics are the actions that we take with that understanding about right and wrong. So you can think about it this way: morals are really in the talking, and ethics are in the walking. So
Okay.
it's a way to
Hmm.
distinguish between the two of them. I'm not sure that's important for our conversation today, but it's a way to think
But
about them.
well, again, this is I was really looking forward to this conversation, because it, it applies to so much, whether it's your interpersonal relationships that you have with a spouse or family members, neighbors, uh, your children, in your workplace. I mean, we're making decisions all the time, and I know that, especially in business, when they've looked at these major decisions by senior executives, they'll say generally they're made, and I will say at an emotional level. And then they go back and rationalize them later. But part of the problem with emotions is that we really don't have great language around that to be able to define it. And so we do have to come up with some sort of a rational justification. um, how does that fit in with ethics? Do we have good language around ethics?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And in fact, I think it was a Nobel-winning economist, Daniel, I want to say Hanahan, but that may not be right. Somebody's going to correct me here, but that's fine. Actually determined that we make choices emotionally first and
Hmm.
rationally second. And if people are sort of scratching their, oh, you got to be kidding. I put a lot of analysis into this. Yeah, in the end, when you choose a car, you may do it simply on the basis of gas mileage, or in this case, electrical is better than diesel and oil powered cars. But
Right.
there probably is also a perspective of, well, what's the shape of the car? How fast does it go 0 to 60? How far can I go? What color is the car? I'm not going to get any colored electric car. I like red. I like blue. And these are very emotional decisions,
Sure.
not rational decisions. And by the way, the car companies know this very well. I think it was GM that said there's a car for every person, and personality. When they put their marketing logo together. So I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that it makes it very difficult for us to think about ethical choices, or the right choices, is that we're a little bit hindered by language that we've got. And again, as philosophy creeps into it, and we talk about things like relativism, which is kind of the ethical philosophy. Well, if they
Hmm.
know one thing over here and we know another thing over here, even though we're 180 degrees from each other, for us it's right and for them it's right. That's relative ethics, right? Or we talk about situational ethics. Oh, situations determine our ethics time to time, place to place, person to person. But of course, that creates the world that we've currently inherited, or we've currently created ourselves, where maybe be treated ethically becomes the luck of the draw,
Hmm.
rather than the intentionality of us understanding that with every choice we make, we can actually step up ourselves and the world to a much more trusting or trustworthy situation. And that's really what ethics are supposed to be. Certainly the message in my book.
Hmm.
What ethics are supposed to be about is building, or in some cases, rebuilding trust with each other, because the world works far better on trust and truthfulness than it does on laws. In fact, I'd rather live in a world where we had no laws and 100% trust
Hmm.
than a world that had 100% laws and no trust. So building that trust is actually what also makes the laws work.
Hmm. It's just oddly enough, I'm reminded of the movie Mary Poppins, where she talks about pie crust promise. She said, "Easily made, easily broken."
Oh,
Right.
yeah,
And
that's right.
yeah, so pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken. And but uh, trust, as we can say, is easily broken, but it does take time, and it takes circumstances to build trust. We certainly don't enter into business arrangements with people we wouldn't trust, but sometimes I don't know. I mean, it's just that it's this trust is really hard to define as well.
It is. And if you think about it, when I ask people, and we're talking about, let's say, trustworthiness as a virtue or
Mhm.
truthfulness as a virtue, when I ask people, okay, what's the most important human virtue? I'll often get the answer love. And of course, that's a great
Mm.
answer. It is really important. But if you begin to think about it, what really undergirds or supports love, true love, is trust. How could you have a love that you do not trust or does not trust you? The bumper and be as strong that's built on, and in truthfulness is the foundation of all of our virtues. So working on that foundation is what helps us create the virtues in all the other directions apart from ourselves towards others that we really we want to create and support. So
Mhm.
truthfulness and trustworthiness are extremely important features of our daily lives. And again, a world that's working on total trustfulness works better than one that's working on laws. And just as a quick example, you think
Mhm.
about a four-way stop. We get to a four-way stop, and when I stop at a four-way stop, I don't know about you, but I don't think, hey, revised Code of Washington RCW number 1795-18 says I got to stop here, so I better do it. It's much more about trust. That
Mhm.
is, I trust you'll stop, and you trust I'll stop. And even though we're going 90 degrees to each other, it's that allows us both to go as fast and as far as we need to, recognizing that we all not necessarily going in the same direction. So even something like a four-way stop is a great example of laws that are actually empowered, a law that's empowered by trust.
Mhm.
And in thinking about others is the way that trust extends itself the furthest. But the world works way better on that basis than it does if we are thinking about, well, what law is it that I have to do here to stop or not stop kind of thing. Or if we just say, oh, it's up to you. I'll let you decide whether you want to stop here or you don't. You think about that intersection, and it's a
Yeah.
completely different scenario.
Right, right. And so part of that then brings in fairness, right? So if we come to the four-way stop and I trust you're going to stop, you trust I'm going to stop. We both stop at approximately the same time.
Mm.
And maybe and there's another car there. They go first and what's fair? Now it's fair. Now what's fair? Do I get to go? Is it my turn to go? Do I wave you on? Now there's I mean, that's a very simplified example, but how does fairness apply into this application?
Yeah, it's a good one. And if you think about it, the laws talk about fairness in a way in this case. So it's a great example, sort of building off of what I was talking about with the four-way trust. If we do arrive at exactly the same time,
Mhm,
laws tell us that we yield to the right. Now, is that the fairest thing that could happen? No, I imagine the fairest thing would be if we both let each other go first, or at least there was some signal that we could raise a
mhm.
flag on the front of our trunk that said, hey, you are the hood, you go first and I'll go second. Because we could sit there waiting and waiting and waiting if we didn't have some way to communicate with one another. But
Right.
the point is
Yeah.
exactly as you're saying, the laws really tell us what should be fair, even though maybe there's another way to do it until we do build that level of trust or that level of why don't you do this, I'll treat others the way I want to be treated. No, you go first. And we see this in lines and other things in our lives, not often four-way stops. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe we do see it at four-way stops where someone who might have gotten there says, nah, go ahead, I'll let you go
Mhm.
first.
Yeah.
That's probably the greatest sense of fairness. But again, yielding to the right is the way that we sort of put that into codes.
Yeah. Well, as my wife says, when she was dealing with her sister growing up, right? She was the older sister. Fairness was she got the same or more.
There you go. That's
But
right.
yeah,
Exactly. Was she the older sister? Is that what you said?
absolutely
Yeah, there
right.
you go.
So
That's
yeah,
right.
she gets the same or more, then life is fair. Just a
That's
weird
right.
one of those weird things, at the four-way stop when we're coming up, and I can tell that another car and I are going to come up there at about the same time. The law says, yeah, the car to the right will, but my experience is I will actually slow down a little bit more and make sure that that car stops just that fraction before I do, so that it's fair for them to go first. Because then there's not that awkward, you're going to go, I'm going to go, I'm going to,
Wait,
and then you start to go
yeah,
and they stop.
right.
And I go, I know it'll take longer for us to reach a decision than for me to just slow down and let you get there first. I don't know.
That's
Weird
exactly
application.
right. And so really you think about it, what you're doing is communicating, because you can't talk to somebody, which is our best form of communication quite often. The only way you can communicate is with the actions of the car. One of the great cases of road rage, and I'm trying to remember the book, I'll probably remember before the interview, that talks about why there is traffic. So what's the reasons for traffic? A majority of it has to do with we cannot communicate to one another. So we wind up using our vehicles and sometimes hand gestures to let one another know what it is that we're really unhappy about, because there's no other way to do it. And that can eventually lead to things like road rage. So I think your point's a good one. We do need to also add a piece of communication to this idea of making right choices that allows others to have some input in us understanding what's ethical and what's not. Ethics is a public process. It means that all of us have to agree that this is the right thing, or at least we need the people affected by what we're about to do or how we're about to choose and take an action. We need them to have input into the situation as well, so that we truly are understanding what's ethical, not just for us, but the others around us that'll be affected by the way that we choose.
I just looking, we've got MT wrote in here, Daniel Kahneman,
Oh, that's it.
Kahn-Man.
Thank you, MT. Yeah,
Won
that's
the
right.
Nobel Prize in Economics 2002.
Thank you. That's right. Daniel Kahneman. That's right.
Yep. And it's a great
Our
book.
economic
Traffic,
decisions
why
are
we
emotional,
why we
not
drive
rational.
the way we do.
Yeah, right.
So this is Traffic, why the way we drive we do, and what it says about it is by Tom Vanderbilt. So
good.
we're getting some more recommendations here. This is good stuff. This is I love the interaction. So thank you for adding those comments in there. And I did get someone to follow us here on Amazon, so that's very good. And I'm just gonna we got a moment. I'm just gonna put your book back up here, Chris. The Noble Edge: Reclaiming an Ethical World, One Choice at a Time. And that's really what it comes down to. You talked about early on, we've got these 21 points that you bring out in the book. And the nice thing is they're summarized at the end, so I could go through and take a look. It was very helpful. Action and decisions. I mean, we're talking about decisions. We had some, you had your own business decision that a company made that hurt a lot of people when they chose to not honor agreements. And I will say, make an unethical choice. We saw some very gross examples, significant examples with Enron and people making choices and ethical conflicts there. But again, we deal with this on a daily basis, I will say, where we make decisions and maybe we don't think whether it's ethical or unethical, but we are dealing with it on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can seem overwhelming. It's like, oh, there's so much wrong, and who in the world am I going to trust? And really, like most things, it's going to start with me taking the steps to really think about the choices that I'm making and not getting lost in a world that doesn't necessarily prioritize making ethical choices. You think about all the people that are popular or rich or well-known leaders. They're often on a base of the popularity that they've got or the monetary resources that they have to make the choices that they do, rather than necessarily thinking about how those choices are affecting the people around them. In fact, there's another story in the book about a company that had created a drug, an over-the-counter drug. And it turned out that the use of that drug was going to be by drunk drivers, DUI, driving under the influence drivers. And the teenage daughter of the CEO of this company, it was a pharmaceutical company in Canada, she was hit and killed by a DUI, by a drunk driver before this product was released. The CEO, being transformed by this tragic accident, suddenly realized what it was they were selling in their drug that would have let drunk drivers off the hook, because it affected the results of these breathalyzers that the troopers will use to pull over and stop drunk drivers. And he stopped the product from going into the marketplace. They lost millions of dollars. He was eventually fired. But he realized, because of that tragedy, that transformation, that the drug that they were going to make a profit out of was really intended for people who were doing very wrong things to get off. And the people who were at most risk weren't the people using the product. It was you and I,
Mm-hmm.
the innocent bystanders on the road, in the case of
Right.
his daughter, or us driving on the road. So
Mm-hmm.
that point became a point of transformation for him. And by the way, that's another point in my book, that ethics isn't about information. It isn't about looking at all these terrible high profile incidents like Enron you mentioned, which is a good one, and saying, okay, well, they've done a terrible thing and off I go to do whatever I do because I think differently than they do. That transformation is about you getting information and then using it to transform, to understand how people will make choices like that, or why they would make a choice like that, and maybe more importantly, why you would never make a choice like that. So ethics isn't about information. It's about transformation. And that's what the book is intended to do too, is to help people see the journey of that transformation and
Mm-hmm.
think about it differently, or more, in more easy, practical ways, how to make those choices, the tough
Yeah.
ones especially.
And that's where I'll just say, you started off your book, and this is a revised version of your book.
Yes.
And it was, there is no right time to make a wrong decision, right?
No, it's close. There's no right way to
No
do
right
the wrong
way.
thing. To do
There's
the
no
wrong
right
thing.
way to do the wrong thing. No right way to do the wrong thing. Yeah,
That's
I knew I should have written it down.
That's right.
Well, and let me just repeat that. There's no right way to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So that's an important principle, I think, and maybe thesis actually to key off of here.
Well, I'm glad you bring it up, because like I said, yeah, like you said, that was actually the original book I put out about 4 years ago now, and we self-published. We had a hard time finding anybody that was interested in doing it in larger venues. And I think in the meantime, a lot of things happened in the world, especially among leadership and all, that really got this idea of trust building, trustworthiness to be really important factors, more so in our daily lives than maybe they had been before. So a publicist, in this case, it was Morgan James Publishing in New York, saw the book and looked at it and said, we think this needs to go out. And so as long as we can maybe change the title, you revise it, adding some new ideas and new stories, we'll put it out. And that's what they did. And to much to my benefit, we were able to put it out in a lot more venues. It's been a huge critical success. We've gotten 22 awards for the book, which is really unprecedented. I'm not sure people go out and look at a reward or an award a book's gotten and said, oh, I'm going to buy that book. But it does help get it out there for people to be able to see it. So it's an easy to read book. It's got humor in it. It's got motivational stories in it. It's really meant to be an easy way of thinking about making good choices.
And I just say it's a great inspiration to folks too, that are thinking, they've got a book. Maybe they've been taking it around to 70 some different publishers.
Yeah, right.
And getting turned down.
I did 42. The first book was 42 publishers.
And they're saying, hey, come on, kid, get out of here. But once you self-published and you actually got it out there, it turned out that it was valuable information, to the point where a publishing house says, maybe they didn't admit it, but they missed the boat. And here's their opportunity to get back on.
That's what it felt like. I don't know that they would admit that. I'm not sure I should feel that way.
I wouldn't put words into anyone's mouth.
That's right. But I felt that too. It's like, oh, finally someone's gone, yeah, this is actually worth it. And why did we pass up on it? Although I had not written them in my original 42 publishers when I did it for the first book. And not to miss your point, the title of the first book was There's No Right Way to Do the Wrong Thing. But that's a huge lesson explained by a lot of stories and some humor in the new book, The Noble Edge, because really, if people think about that mantra and they repeat it when they get up in the morning or when they go to bed at night, it really can become an important way of thinking about making choices in some cases in a much easier way than the other ways people might think about them as rules or sins or policies and procedures. There is no right way to do the wrong thing. And we often justify what is the wrong thing and even feel good about the choices that we make sometimes, because somehow or other we've got in our heads, if I can just rationalize this a certain way, it's all right for me to make the wrong choice in this case because I'm going to benefit somehow. I'll skip out on a punishment. I'll get a reward. You think about it, if we can make this personalized rather than philosophical. When that policeman, policewoman pulls you over on the freeway for speeding and walks up to the car and you roll the window down and they say, excuse me, do you know how fast you were going? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll come up with all kinds of ways to rationalize not telling the truth. No, I don't. Or, my speedometer's off. Or, it was prevailing traffic speed. I was just following everybody else. Any number of ways other than saying, yep, I saw I was doing 80 and I knew you were pulling me over and I'll take the ticket because what? We'll rationalize. I don't want my insurance rates to go up. I don't want the ticket on my record. I don't want the ticket, period. I got my kid in the car and I don't want to be embarrassed by actually getting fined for doing something wrong. There are any number of ways that we go, yeah, it's just fine for me not to tell the truth in this case. But that's the same kind of thinking that the high profilers do, like the Enrons, let's say, when they make a choice that might defraud millions of dollars and lose tens of thousands of jobs in the corporations. I've come as bigger. Think much different the way we do realize it to our benefit.
Yeah, I was reading your book. I remembered a story from my own life when my wife and I were newly married, and like every newly married couple, you're struggling, just trying to make things, make the rent and buy enough food. And well, it was Christmas time, and we were at a big retailer, publicly traded retailer, and this is back in the day when we were writing paper checks. We wrote our check. It was $120 or some worth of Christmas presents that we bought. It was frantic. It's Christmas time. And of course, this is a big publicly traded company. They had announced record profits and all that stuff. We got home, take the stuff out of the bag. What did I find? My check.
Oh.
And because just in the hubbub, that cashier put our check into the bag instead of the receipt. And we could have thought, hey, look, and this is that relative thing. Look, they're making lots of money. I'm not making any money. They won't miss $120. But we took the check back and said, unfortunately, this got included in there. And I don't know if it was going to hurt the cashier. It certainly wouldn't bankrupt the company. Would have been a big boon for us. But it wasn't the right thing to do, to keep that check, right? To not pay for our stuff. And I feel better today. Because we gave that back.
It's a story you would not have told if you hadn't given it back, I imagine. Or maybe you would have told, at least in this interview, about an ethics book. There are several.
I pulled one over on him, right?
Yeah, that's right. There were actually several stories in the book. Maybe I'll kind of do one where it was, in the sense, it's the same, and it was with a bank that I was using. And I'd gone to the bank to make a deposit through the drive up, and I'd made the deposit and drove away. And a few days later, I noticed in my account, it was $20,000 richer than it was before I'd gone to the bank. And I couldn't really understand it. So I went in and I found out with my receipt that the teller had made the mistake of putting the decimal in the wrong place. So instead of $2,000 into my account, she had put $20,000 into my account, right? So did I go through some questions? Sure, I did. I think I'm human like anybody else. And ethics wasn't actually a part of my professional life, I should say. I have to say that carefully. I wasn't doing ethics as a profession at the time.
Right.
But yeah, I'm going to go through this sort of scratch. Oh, gosh. I mean, maybe I could run off to the next branch and get the money out as cash, and then off I go. But I mean, I thought about it and I said, look, this isn't going to end happy for anybody unless I give the money back or identify this. Whether it's the teller's problem or not, that kind of a mistake is a pretty big one for the company. So she might have had some trouble after that, but at the same time, maybe she wouldn't ever do that again, which would be good. But it was very interesting. For me, the interesting part of the story was the bank wouldn't take the money out of the account until I proved I hadn't given it to them. Which is really interesting, right? Because now, in addition to wondering, well, how do I prove I didn't give them $20,000? Shouldn't that be part of their record they have to go through? How do you prove to a bank you didn't give them money? You know,
Mhm.
but more than that, this is giving me days and days, because it took about a week, days and days to think about doing the wrong thing. Right? So if they're making it tough for me to give them their 20,000, I should keep it, right? Maybe that's the best lesson. I came up with all kinds of ways of rationalizing, but in the
Yeah.
end, overnight, without me knowing or getting a letter from them, my bank account dropped
They
that 20,000. I
they
guess
made the
it
adjustment.
dropped
And
$18,000 because I'd given them two.
right.
And so they made the adjustment. But it was really an interesting case of the more time I had, the more I could come up with reasons to
Mhm.
come up with this. And, we're pretty good at rationalizing as human beings. And I think a part of the story, which is also in the book, a part of that story is you need to get information, you need to get outside input, you need to make the stakeholders, the people that are affected or the organizations affected, a part of your decision making. If you're doing that and the bank turns to me and says, keep it, we don't care. Okay. I've had the
Mhm.
stakeholders tell me that it's all right to do what I'd like to do, but necessarily shouldn't do. And they're telling me, yeah, you should do it. I can't imagine that would happen, but I suppose it could. So the more we get input from the people that we think will affect, and we can't always do that. We're going to have to make some guesses, like cutting someone off on a freeway. I can't get their input about whether that's all right or not. But it is an ethical choice I'm making to cut them off because it helps me and hurts
Mhm.
them. And
Yeah.
I can justify it any number of ways. But at any rate, we make this a more public conversation, and actually we can start to tackle some of the more difficult choices that we're making.
And part of this is that um, you make the point that the ethics are really outside of us, that they are universal.
Yeah, the book makes a point that they have to be universal or they're not working. A
Mhm.
lot of people think ethics are iffy, they're gray, they can't really see. But I think it's very important, or maybe a more fortunate way to think about them is, ethics are black and white. Now, the situation may make it very difficult to see what's right or wrong, or even almost impossible to do the right thing because of whatever the consequences are. But the ethics of that choice, this is right or this is wrong, actually are there for us to be able to see if we go look for them hard enough. And so I sometimes use the analogy, for the people that are saying ethics are gray, or this is a gray area, it's sort of like using the phrase sort of pregnant, or I sort of voted, or I'm sort of human. And,
Mhm.
the deal is that's not true. You are or you aren't, you did or you didn't, right? There are all kinds of ways we could rationalize and not telling the truth about it, I suppose. But
Right.
if we understand that ethics are really there to tell us what's right and what's wrong, it starts to make choices a little easier. And I think the analogy I use in the book, or one of them, is the idea of guardrails on the side of a bridge. If you cross a high bridge, the higher the bridge, the more substantial we want the guardrails on the side to be. So you imagine coming up to a bridge in the rain or snow or the wind, or even on a clear day, and there's a drop off. There aren't any guardrails on the side at all. It drops straight off into the water. In our case, we got a bridge that's about 200 feet above the water here in Tacoma, Seattle, right? So it's a mile
Mhm.
long, 200 feet high. But I tell you what, if it were me and there were no guardrails on the side, I would stop my car on one side, go crawling or walking slowly in the middle of the bridge to get to the other side, get in my car on that side of the bridge, run my errand, and then come back and do the same thing opposite. So if we begin to think about ethics as guardrails,
Mhm.
they're really a privilege. It's not about a sin or something illegal or violated this policy procedure or this code. It's really about the privilege of having ethics there to allow us to go as fast and as far as we can together, because it's not just us crossing the bridge.
Mhm.
And aren't we grateful that they're there for us
Yeah.
to be able to do it? I think that's a much more effective way to think about what ethics are there for, us as we make choices, than any other way that we might think about it.
So a critical component of society is ethics.
Well, yeah,
Critically important. Yeah.
it is how we work together, whether we
Mhm.
trust people or not. There's
Yeah.
a moment by moment in our lives, people doing things that impact us, whether it's an organization, healthcare organization, a store clerk, something. They're doing things that are having an impact on us, and the more we can trust what they do, and we see
Mhm.
consistently that they're doing the right thing for us, and the more we do the right things for other, the better society will, the better it works. And that's why the book is really subtitled the way it is. We can change the ethics, our ethics, and the ethics of society one choice at a time, if we're
Yeah.
thinking about clearly what's the right thing and what's the wrong thing and how does it affect the others that are around us.
I think about how important that trust is, because I can be driving down a 2-lane road where the center line has been faded.
Hmm.
And I'm going 60. There's another car coming the other direction at 60. So we're approaching each other at 120 miles an hour. But I trust that that person is going to stay for me over on that left side of the road, and I'll be hugging the right side of the road, and we will pass each other at 120 miles an hour and not have an incident.
Absolutely true. And you think even the people who think, I want to be able to make my own choices, and this is up
Mhm.
to me, and I want my independence and be able to liberty. I want to make any choice I want to make because that works for me. Even the people that are that way, thinking that we don't need all these things together, their lives are affected by the lack of trust in your example of the other person on the side of the road. Is this an independent who doesn't care about the line down the center of the road, like me? Or is this someone who's going to stay on that side? Either way, I've got two choices. I can
Mhm.
slow down and kind of move over to the median to make sure if he comes on my side, he'll go by. Or I close my eyes and stomp my foot down, and I hope that in the end, it turns out to be someone who decided on their own that they'd stay on the other side. So even people who would argue that ethics or social constructs are really in the way of them making true choices, liberty, not liberty with responsibility, just liberty,
Mhm.
that are going to be affected in their lives by the same people on the other side that feel the same way and don't agree that we need to trust one another about things. So
Mhm.
there's nothing good that comes out of someone just literally saying this is about liberty and my rights, when in
Yes.
fact our rights
Mhm.
can't violate others' rights or they're not right.
Yeah, it's interesting because you did make that point clearly in the book too, that it's not about rights. I often say that the founding fathers, as we refer to them, when they added all those amendments to our Constitution here in the U.S., that they made the big mistake by not naming them the Bill of Responsibilities.
Yes.
And people storming the street, and you can't do that because that's my responsibility.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I've sometimes thought and actually brought up in a couple of the venues that I've been in the idea that we do right now have a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of the United States. And what
Mm.
we ought to do is build a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. I would put it on Alcatraz Island. Build a Statue of Responsibility, because liberty without responsibility is anarchy. So
Wow.
the only way to exercise liberty, as you say, is with responsibility. And I'd love to see the country bordered by that idea, right? East Coast and West Coast. And it's liberty
That's
and responsibility.
I'll just say that's tweetable right there.
There you
Liberty
go.
without responsibility is anarchy.
That's right.
That's a good one right there. We'll get that put on the bumper stickers and sell it
Oh,
here on Amazon.
I want my percentage now. All right.
We are having a good time. Dr. Christopher Gilbert, The Noble Edge, Reclaiming an Ethical World, One Choice at a Time. The book's here in the carousel. Click on it. Um, it does read well, and even though we're entering the summer season, I think this is a great book to carry through the summer. As people are out there, maybe the temperatures are getting warmer. It's kind of affecting our emotions, and we need to be rational about the decisions we make.
That's a great way to put it. I hadn't thought about it. I'd love it to be a beach read, but I didn't think about the fact that our irritation level often goes up, or maybe it's down. I don't know. Anyway, we get more irritated when we're hot and sweaty, and the summertime's good for that. So that's an interesting way. That's an interesting way of putting it. I love people just to pick up this book to
Mhm,
begin a conversation with each other. And like you pointed out in the front,
mhm.
I think it's as useful in the family room as it is in the boardroom. I think that's on the back
Yeah.
cover of the book, because it's really meant to be about how we talk with each other
Mhm.
about making better choices, right choices, and more consistently right choices than we are now, so that we build a world of trust and trustworthiness.
Yeah. And as you say that, I mean, it's human relations, right? So whether we're, as you say, in the family room, in the living room, in the boardroom, wherever it is, it's people to people. And when we're making those decisions, I think that's one of the things maybe that got people like those over at Enron, Skillings, and so forth, in trouble, because they were not thinking of human beings. And often in war, we dehumanize our enemy. And in business, when you're going to make those unethical choices, you dehumanize the people that you're affecting.
Very true. And another lesson out of Enron and many other of these organizations and leaders and individuals is they wind up using a language, as you were speaking about before, in this case, the codes that were used, let's say, in finance and business language. And they wind up using them in a way that they know we're not going to truly understand the way that they're using them. I use the example in the book that one of the things that Enron and other organizations do financially is they'll do the right financial reports, but the sort of step on the stage, and I'll use this as a simple example of coded language. It's like me stepping on the stage and saying, you know, I had my dog put to sleep, and I'm really very sad about this. And everybody in the room understanding that language a certain way. But what I wound up doing was I took the dog to the vet. They got a shot to put them to sleep. They slept all night, and they're running around great the next day. Well, I know you know what the code is, and that how you're going to take my language.
Right.
But there's nothing, and then Enron did this financially. There's nothing in the laws that says I have to check out whether you heard the words in code or you heard them out of code. There's no rule about that. I just have to use the right words. And so I don't have to check out the definition that you have for them versus my definition of them. And, you know, we do this all the time. And I think the example I use is someone like a spouse or a partner stepping out of the dressing room and saying, whatever they're wearing, how do I look? And whatever you can't stand wrong, whatever, like it, they're sort of struggling. I'm going to be transparent or truthful. How do I tell this person without hurting their feelings? I don't like what it is that they're wearing. That's a great lesson in coded language, because we'll often come up with a code like, oh, that's the most yellow thing I think you've got, dear. I've never seen you in a yellower dress than that one, right? Or, oh, I think sometimes that makes people look shorter than they really are, don't you? And just the coded way of trying to be careful about not hurting someone's feelings, and feelings do matter. That's not the Enron example, but it's a code example that, of the codes that we use or have to come up with at a time every day.
Well, it just reminds me there was a car race. This is back in the back during the days of the former Soviet Union, and when Pravda was their central news source. So U.S. Manufactured car went over to race against the Soviet manufactured car. And in the end, the first car that crossed over the line was the U.S. car. So how was that reported in Pravda? Well, of course, it was the Soviet car came in second, and the U.S. manufactured car came in second to last.
That's good. And you know what Pravda means? I lived over in Russia for about a year back in the early 90s. Pravda is the Russian word for truth. That's Pravda.
Well, there you go.
So, yeah.
So trying to use words to promote yourself in a probably not the most ethical way, but
exactly. But that's a great example, by the way, of the codes that we can use. Second to last, not being first, because we'll interpret it like, oh, second to last, that wasn't so good.
Oh, it's
there were only two cars, right?
Yeah, but this is some missing information.
Yeah,
there.
Exactly. We'll just leave pieces out. Yeah.
Chris, I have so much fun talking to you. I really enjoy this, but we're gonna have to wind down. What are some of the last things that when people get the book, what should they be looking for? What do you want them to take away from this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you talked about the 21. They're really sort of the lessons or morals in the book, no pun intended. And there are 9 action steps in the book. I think the most potent step for people to think about, I keep talking about easier way of making ethical choices, is the idea that we can put our ethical choices on a 3-step ladder, and that we have always been standing on one of those steps. We will always stand on one of those steps when we're making an ethical choice. The first step, I should say, maybe the least moral step, if I could put it that way, is thinking that it's about me. Whatever I choose, it's about me in the end, either getting a reward or avoiding a punishment. But it's about me that I make this ethical choice. The next step up is it's about some of us, the people I love, the people I care about, the people in my scout troop, the people in my church, the people in my nation. Or in my state or in my region. I'll think about that group as a part of who receives a benefit or loses something by making my choice. That's the second step. The highest step is it's about all of us. That is, it's about not just me and some of us, but everyone who's going to be affected by the choices I make. And you think about any ethical choice you've ever made, small or large, and you've been standing on, all of us have been standing on one of those steps to make that choice. And the worst thing we can do is we phrase our choice as though we've made it for a whole bunch of people, so it's all about us. But in the fact, I'm getting some reward out of the choice that I'm making. And you can see ex-presidents of the United States, and I'm going farther back than more recently, who said, you know what, we'll burglarize the other Republic or the Democratic headquarters here for me to be able to get elected, because in the end, if I get reelected, the world's going to be far better off. That's sort of framing a choice about me getting reelected in the sense that somehow or other it's going to be better for the world, better for all of us if I do it. There's a real danger in being able to do that. So the book talks about, all right, how can you think of each of those steps very clearly? And that's one of, I think, one of the most effective ways of trying to understand making ethical choices. And I think a different way of understanding ethical choices than perhaps the way that a lot of people have thought about them in the past. So.
And then how do people get a hold of you? Because they can bring you in for their business or an event, as a speaker, as a consultant. What's the best way? Well, actually, I think the best way is for people to buy the book, because your contact information is in there.
Okay, the second best way.
The second best way. How are people going to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the book has all kinds of ways of contacting us. We've got PO boxes, we've got an address for the business, we've got websites and so forth. So probably the quickest way for somebody would be, in fact, to go to our website, which is at nobleedgeconsulting.com. So that's www.nobleedgeconsulting, all one word with two E's in the middle, NOBLEEDGE. So nobleedgeconsulting.com. You'd actually be able to get a copy of the book, but you'll also see the work that we do in the company and a way to get a hold of us to talk about whatever you do. And I've worked on a lot of business conduct and personal and professional ethics trainings or facilitations or conversations about the book around the world. I'd love to book clubs to get a hold of me so that I can be a part of that in the Zoom world, or organizations if they want to talk about ethics in a different way, more effective way, a more profitable way. Love to do that. But anybody getting a hold of me, any kind of input is really very, very welcome.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's just the world continues to be more complicated, and as we have cross borders, we have different cultures, we have lots of opportunities for us to make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely true. And you said it up front, I think too, that exercise is, ethics is not an exercise of our rights, it's an exercise of our virtues. So in fact, thinking about that perspective, rights become a part of what we want to achieve. But the way that we exercise our virtues with one another is actually how we give and get the rights and the freedoms that we really are looking for, right? So ethics is really the foundation of our greatest personal freedoms.
And liberty without responsibility is anarchy.
That's right. Yeah,
I got that one right.
You got them all right. I really appreciate talking with you too, Scott. This is a great opportunity. So.
Oh, it's been fun. I'm going to put you into the green room, but stand by. I'll be right with you. I'm going to wind this one down.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott.
All right. So that is Dr. Christopher Gilbert, and we've got his book. Let's put it back up here. It is in the carousel, The Noble Edge, Reclaiming an Ethical World. One choice at a time. We all have the opportunity to make the right choices. Get the book. It's going to be a good summer read. You're going to want to take that and share it, use it in your business, use it in your personal life. But with that, we are going to wind down this broadcast here on Amazon. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate the comments and the follows, and everyone have a fabulous day. Cheers.